asked me if I was a pretzel person or a peanut person, and I usually get a choice between the two. And for him, it was like a really eternal choice, like you had to be one or the other, you know, and your identity depended on it, which I thought was very strange. You know, but I can't ever stop thinking about this question. So even today, I was thinking about it. Every time I get on a plane, I think about this question. It seems to me like there's some kernel of truth embedded in this question about ourselves as human beings. And I like this idea of something really trivial, actually, is perhaps having really deep significance for our lives. It's called Contents Tend to Shift During Flight. Are you a pretzel person or a peanut person? Someone asked me this once. I can't remember who or where I was going. We were on a plane. The stewardesses were shifting down the aisle their cart of refreshments, one fore, one aft, playing their little duet of pop cans, plastic cups, ice cubes, and branded napkins, singing something to drink from window to aisle, aisle to window, tray tables unlatched and steadied row by row, almost a domino effect, people clearing papers and magazines and paperbacks from their lap space, some rousing themselves from sleep, grateful not to have been passed over, all poised to make their choice, Coke, Sprite, tomato juice, ginger ale, accepting the foil pouch of pretzels or peanuts, sometimes getting to choose between the two. Hence the question, as if my identity depended on it. Pretzel person, peanut person, morning person, night person, cat person, dog person, Democrat, Republican, Christian, Muslim. I don't like to think of myself in these terms. But people go to war over these choices. They fight over peanuts. And I know I have to choose sides at times to participate in this weird menagerie called civilization, if only to get some pretzels or peanuts, Coke or Sprite. The man who asked this question, the answer was deeply important to him. He wanted to define himself for the duration of the trip, if not his whole life, by his choice of one of two arbitrary salty options. He wanted to step into his choice and be completely content with it. No regrets, no pining after peanuts with pretzels in his mouth. And he seemed a little sorry for me when I said I had no idea, that I hadn't really thought about it. I've always been between identities. With peanuts and pretzels, it is no different. I could go either way depending on my mood. I've spent more time thinking about my choice of drinks on planes, not wanting to be stuck with something I'll have to throw down in shots once the stewardess comes guilting me down the aisle with her trash bag. Now, after so many plane trips, I can safely say I'm a ginger ale person. I waste no time deliberating over other drinks. And I can see what the man was getting at, this just being me, decisively, all the time, knowing all my material manifestations. Yet despite his passion to define himself through pretzels or peanuts, I don't remember him or his choice, but the question. Just as all the meticulous ways I've defined myself over the years have dropped away, leaving me only with questions about the kind of person I really am. As I continue to define myself with so many new media now at my disposal, Twitter, Facebook, MySpace, iPhones, iPods, all of which will disappear or be replaced in 10 years, leaving me clutching at something else. The choice between peanuts and pretzels is gone. Most airlines today can't afford even one of these options. You might hear this as a rebuke of the man's question, proof that we should be asking something more important. Are you a good person or a bad person? But somehow the question keeps coming back to me. I hear it every time I get on a plane. And I remember, just a month after 9/11, when I was flying to see someone I felt serious enough about to fly during that time, whom later I would choose another younger woman over, just as she had chosen me over another older man. Waking up to the sound of pop cans popping open and being poured furious over ice, the stewardesses extending drinks and divvying pretzels and peanuts with more care, more hunger to help, as if they knew there was something sacred in this, that these stupid little liberties in the air, these peanuts, were what we most wanted to protect. Sorry if you don't say pop when you're referring to a Coke, and you say maybe soda. I grew up saying pop.
Yeah.
This next poem is actually about my name, primarily my last name. I grew up with a lot of different nicknames, as you can imagine, many different permutations of Coo, which is Coo Man and Coo Master, Coo Meister. Some of my favorite ones, in high school, one of my friends called me Coup d'etat. Also, when people studied haiku, they would like to say haiku, and my students always discover this at some point during the semester. Poor students, they'll be like, 2 months into the semester, they'll say haiku when I come in the door, like they've all discovered this joke together. I've already heard it like 100 times. Anyway, I was online a couple of months ago, and I was reading about names, and apparently my name is very heavy on vowels. There aren't many names that have a lot of vowels in them. So the poem kind of sprung from this fact. It's called A Natural History of My Name. Today I read that only 2.2% out of 1 million first and last names have a higher vowel than consonant ratio. And since 50% of the letters in my name are vowels, this means I am extremely well invoweled. I go outside strutting the bulge in my name. The trees are wowed by my vowels. They only have 2 E's, which is why they have no leaves at this time of year. The snow must submit to the scrunch of my boots. Snow only has 1 O, and I have 3. Even my boots, so tough and rugged, clearly dominating the 1-O'd snow, must bow down to the deity of me, with 3, never raising themselves higher than my feet. I cross the bridge and it is the same. The river cannot keep up with me. Look at it writhing in the ice, so fearsome with its 66.6% vowel to consonant ratio, but not intimidating to me, because ice, if you'll notice, slides on its C, eventually skidding to a stop like a hockey player before the puck of the E, which in a flick disappears. Whereas I keep floating out on my opening of O's. The song of my name is repeated through nature. Cuckoos and owls take pleasure in perpetuating it. Just one coo is never enough for them. Coo must always come coupling through their throats. You can hear this song taken up by school children. I used to hear it all the time. I thought kids were taunting me, but now I know they were just jealous of my O's. They saw these heaped in their bowls of canned spaghetti and cereal, but no matter how many spoonfuls they jammed in their mouths, no matter how many more muscles they grew than me, they never grew any more richly invoweled. This was just something you had to be born with, a natural advantage of hailing from a family that came from a tiny Pacific peninsula whooped by other countries. Our name shed contours of consonants to slip past detection, shape-shifting into other words like a syllable chameleon, from haiku to coup d'etat, matching colonial culture and upheaval. So when I hear haiku today, followed by a giggle, the laugh is not on me, but on the oppressors, whose whole poetic tradition gets cheerfully wiped out by my arrival. Take that, Japan. 35 years of occupation. I'm going to read from my book now. Thank you, Michael, for inviting me. It's very nice to be back in Cleveland and to have the opportunity to read to you. I grew up in Cleveland, as Michael mentioned, and it's a little weird to be back. And thank you, Mathias and Simone, for some really fantastic readings in there. These are really some great poets here. Forget about me, you should just buy their books. Because, is that a baby? baby wasn't there behind her. So this next poem I'm going to sort of preface with an apology. I'm reading Chaucer with my Intro to British Literature students right now at Beamer College. And there's a famous moment at the end of the general prologue to the Canterbury Tales where Chaucer apologizes to his readers because the content of his poems is going to be a little bit vulgar at times, and he is going to have to use language that is commensurate to this content. And he feels that if he changes the language or sort of makes it less vulgar, it will be to falsify the truth. So I'm just going to invoke the authority of Chaucer for this poem, but this is the poem that starts off my book. And it's about this town of, it's called Effingham, this town in Illinois which I would pass when I lived in Missouri and I would drive home to Cleveland. And I would pass this town and be really amused by the name. But I would also think that, you know, for the people living in this town, for those times in their life where they felt like, you know, they really had to let out, that the word effing was really just not enough, you know, to convey their emotions. So it's a poem about, you know, needing to use a certain kind of language at certain times of your life. It's called Swearing by Effingham. Effingham, Illinois, let's just let it all out. Sometimes you need to call a fucking ham a fucking ham. As I drive home past your road signs toward the tranquilizer of Thanksgiving dinner, I think of Effinghamians effing this and effing that while shifting in line at the post office as the one clerk not on lunch break chats to the matron with the 15 badly taped packages about her daughter's improving performance in AP Chem. But what a whelp of joy and vindication would I let out were I to see 5 miles to Fuckingham. What an eternal chorus of honks and fuck yeah with a sign of illicit from the purgatorial stream of interstate travelers, many of whom may, like me, have spent the past 300 miles kicking a love in their brains, astonished at the swift toggle between tenderness and fuck you. One moment, caresses and reconciliation, the next, meatloaf to the beloved's face. Sometimes you need to know you're not alone, that for your rage, there's a Fuckingham palace. Effing manganese, effing tungsten, effing zirconium. Which one of you elements is responsible for the seething in the fluid of my eyes? I shake my head and clear, shake my head and clear, and for a moment see the peacefulness of fields gently laid with light. But soon the film of her is there again. Once she was a lens, once a bridge to each of the weeds. Effingham, I salute the muffling of your name, the comic elegance of so much restraint, as if you were slipping onto the punches of tongue's large aqua blue mittens. In an earlier life, I may have enjoyed a certain camaraderie in your bleachers, booing your effing quarterback, fumbling the effing snap, or asking what a man has to do to get some effing fries up in this place. But now I need a city to carry the roar sound in my chest, the hate concocting a whole new slew of vowels, where to unleash such words as I mull might not bruise other ears, but be gratifying and returned with thanks. I want to apologize to my mom at this point. And to my dad, I'm sorry. Neither one of them taught me to use that language. In fact, I was thinking about that poem today because I'm supposed to read it in my high school tomorrow, although there might be a snow day, I guess. And they were telling me not to read that poem. It's a private school. And I was thinking about the day I learned to swear. I think it was in like the 2nd grade. I still remember the day. I was like riding my bike and my best friend, his name was Jay actually, incidentally. And one day he's like, hey, do you know these words? It was a really exciting moment for me. I was riding my bike, saying these words, and he was like, shh, because I was shouting these words out loud. And I had no idea what I meant. So I felt like that was like an early moment where I was becoming a poet. Okay, I'm going to read the title poem of my book. Just a few more, couple more poems. This is a poem that's based on a cartoon. Apparently, this cartoonist, Guillermo Mordillo, he's an Argentinian cartoonist. He's a world-famous cartoonist, but nobody I've ever met knows who this guy is, which is very strange. And when I asked the Mordillo agency if they would let me use this cartoon for the cover of my book, they refused my request, which I didn't appreciate. But now I have this very nice cover designed by somebody else. But this is based on a cartoon. He creates these little parables with like a very small man and a very small woman usually, and both the man and the woman have very large noses. And they are often depicted on islands, and many of the cartoons are about the alienation of human beings. So in this particular cartoon, there is a very small man who is sitting on an island about the size of a pitcher's mound. And he's imagining this island is the kneecap of a gigantic woman who is lying out on the seafloor. So just imagine there's like a bubble above his head, and he's imagining that this island is a kneecap. And this is somehow consoling to him. I think that would actually be frightening to me, but this is consoling to him. It's a man on an extremely small island. I think I must be sitting on the kneecap of a gigantic woman, stretched out on the seafloor, one long leg folded in, triangulating heavenward. Her knee just breaches the surface enough to make my seat. How she came to be here, how I happened to wash up on her kneecap shore, why she never puts her leg down. These are questions I do not pursue. Instead, I try to picture the woman's face, eyes lidded, mouth upturned in sleepy pleasure. She can just bear the tickling my body gives her. Naturally, I'm afraid that if I move too much, a giant hand will come whale bursting out of the water to thwop me like a golf ball into the sea. So, still as possible. Once I did an experiment. I got down on my belly, gingerly. Seal wagged my upper body down the eastern slope of her knee and sent my hands snorkeling. A distinct shudder. Was that her thigh? That shudder nearly broke my ribs, so I've never tried the opposite slope for shin. Sometimes, as is my way, I begin to feel ungrateful. Why couldn't it have been a breast instead of a knee? I could lie down, feel cared for, sleep. I could relax. The irony, of course, is that from the sky, the knee probably looks like a breast, with me as nipple. So, when you notify the Coast Guard about my situation, be sure to warn them of the resemblance. Not that I expect anyone to find me. By the time you get this message, if you get it, I'll have been swallowed up by a storm. The fact that I haven't been already, I would call a miracle. But when you throw yourself off a ship, lose consciousness, and come to on a kneecap, can anything else go by that name? Miracle. In all those years, I asked for a smaller nose. I said to God, just give me a chance. This isn't a nose, it's a melon. Just make it a little smaller, something a woman can convince herself to live with if I am a good enough man. When I came to that first strange morning, I thought I'd washed up on a giant nose. I said to God, very funny, very, very funny, hilarious, I'm dying here, you kill me. Then I put my nose into my hands and wept. But now I think kneecap. I won't give God that satisfaction. And my sea goddess, she has no nose, just a space where mine can fit. I'm running out of shirt. You might be wondering where I got this bottle. Someone must have thrown it off the ship. There was another message inside. I'm alone, it said. Find me, find me. I threw it in the water. Strange. I used to hate sitting in my apartment, night after night, hearing murmurings in the apartments around me. Now I stare at the endless sunshot blue and try to imagine walls. Did you hear about that killer, the Shamu, that killed the trainer the other day? I was thinking about that when I read that word whale bursting. Definitely not a death I would prefer. Death by Shamu. Just a couple more. This is a very Cleveland poem. I was reading this poem on the radio yesterday, and I was a little bit unhappy because they cut it off about a third of the way through before the big finish. This is about the game 7 in 1997 when the Cleveland Indians lost to the Florida Marlins. How many of you remember this game? Yes, that's it. This is not a Cleveland audience at all. Maybe it's a real suffering people in here. So this is one of the really seminal moments in my life, and I actually distinctly remember. I think it was in the 9th inning when we were trying to preserve this lead. I was thinking to myself, what happens if we win?
Right.
Do I have to be a happy person? And it occurred to me that if we win, then I might have a different kind of life, but if we lose, that will kind of seal my fate. And so then when it was clear that we were going to lose, I was thinking to myself, it sounds really corny, but I was actually thinking to myself, well, I guess now I know I have to become a poet because my fate is sealed as a loser. And they still have not yet won the World Series. So this is a poem about, for anyone that might lose a Game 7 in the future, it's called How to Watch Your Team Lose Game 7 of the World Series. You can't. And because you can't, make sure to watch the game alone. A sports bar filled with frat boys is not a good idea. What you need is a cave. No, what you need is a space shuttle, so you can set the TV up in the cargo bay and bounce back and forth while the bad thing begins to happen. When your closer gives up a leadoff single in the bottom of the 9th that turns into a hit and run, then runners on 1st and 3rd, 1 out, your team teeteringly up 2-1, you can throw all kinds of heavy machinery into space, like oxygen tanks or bits of satellite, without feeling guilty about smashing up the inside of a sports bar or paranoid about any snickering going on behind you. When the catastrophic thing happens, you can throw yourself into space. The catastrophic thing will happen, only it will take time. It is in the nature of catastrophic things to strike not when you most expect them to, but just after. So do not give in to hope. Hope will be the ruin of you, and you are already a ruin. Back as far away from the TV as possible. This will make the game seem as if it were taking place in a distant foreign land, like Japan or Korea. And even if the relief is only temporary, the catastrophe, when it occurs, will take longer to reach you. You may notice a paradox, yourself wishing for the catastrophe. Put me out of my misery, you say. I can't take it anymore. And yet you can take it anymore, because no matter how miserable you get, it is always better to be inside the game than out. Even when the number 9 hitter lines a sac fly to right to tie the game at 2, and you feel your lungs fall into your stomach, or when the double play grounder goes off your second baseman's glove to put a runner on 3rd in the 11th, and you know this is the beginning of the end. Or when the tiny shortstop reaches out for the low slider and flicks it past your pitcher's glove to send the winning run home, and you feel something twitch inside you like a needle skipping on a record. This is better than the post-game show, when you have to watch the opposing team's manager growling triumphantly to his wife behind the backstop, and sit through the celebration of 67,000 fans whose conception of suffering in baseball is seeing neither team score for 3 innings. Your psyche is setting into place like a broken bone. You can feel your future being routed away from happiness like ocean air into beige Midwestern office cubicles. Every handshake, smile, and kiss from now on containing a little sag in it, a percentage of oof. And these people are celebrating. A spectacle you can only endure because the post-game show, horrible as it is better than the post-game show. which will find you suffocating not only in the emptiness of a dead season, but a whole childhood of longing unfulfilled. All the hours spent unlocking box scores at the kitchen table, all the nights spent listening to West Coast games on the radio as you fell asleep, all the endless winter afternoons spent sitting at the foot of your bed studying the backs of baseball cards, the players you didn't know, the Bill Pacotas and Jaime Kokenauers, piecing together their seasons, their ascent through minor league towns, Fort Myers, Jacksonville, Memphis, Omaha, all the losses, so many losses endured, the pitching changes, errors, runners left on base. And then this, to see your team up by a run with 2 outs to go, to get a glimpse of another life, and to sit there powerless as this life is slowly siphoned away from you and replaced with the one you already have, the one your whole life has been preparing you for. Nice memory to return to. Let's move on. This is the last poem. Thank you again for coming and for staying so late. I'd like to dedicate this poem to my mother and father and thank them not only for bringing so many people out here tonight. Where's my mom? I don't even see her. But I'd also like to thank you for being so supportive of me over the years. I know you didn't envision that I would become a poet. I mean, who would, really? But you supported me nonetheless, and have been really amazing to me, especially in the last year or so, in the time leading up to this book and then after the book came out. So I'd like to thank you personally. This is a last poem about really how selfish I've been over the years, and not thanking my parents, so that's why I'm thanking them now. And it takes its title from a phrase by Gertrude Stein, "There is no there, there," which can mean a number of different things, but interpret it as you may. There is no there, there. It's a day you feel like dying, and you stop at a McDonald's on the long drive home for what could be your last meal. You sit sandwiched between 2 minivans full of sleeping children in the parking lot, carefully unpeeling a paper napkin on your lap, and thinking of the trips your family used to take, how your parents let you and your sisters sleep in the car while they stopped to get food, warm bags of it that would wake you. And when you woke to the smell of fries and the crinkling of paper, everyone eating their selections in silence, it didn't occur to you how fortunate you were to have parents like this, how that mournful munching could be missed. Suddenly, the selfishness of children seems the greatest crime against humanity, and you want to call your parents to thank them, but no, you won't. Your internal irony already kicking in, mocking your situation, how obviously you're feeling sorry for yourself, listening to the sad slate of love songs and tending quietly to the quarter-pounder on your lap. Can one cry over a quarter-pounder with no cheese? You straighten up and look indifferent as first one mom, then the other, comes back to her children bearing bulging white bags, passes out the fries and little cheeseburgers, then sits for a while watching them in the rear-view mirror, occasionally picking at a fry to let them know she's eating too. How miserable you were on those car rides. How inexplicable. What state must you be in now to equate that misery with comfort? To see gardens in those minivans already filling with grease, to feel home in the weight of this burger in your hand. It's a trick of advertising, you know, and yet the care and continuity of corporations on this day seems curiously all you have. You who are so unreachable, who wants only for those minivans to leave you to the bottom of your bag strewn with fries, the crooked brown fence edging the parking lot, the sound of your chewing over these songs, these familiar repetitions. Thank you.
Simone,
Yes.
with the film noir poem, is there any film noir movies in particular you're thinking of with that, or any ideas?
I watched them, and so they all coagulate. But I think at the time, I'm teaching the Big Heat, and my students are giving a presentation on Maltese Falcon. But no, they're not. The way that I'm addressing them is it's not specific to a certain film, but it's more to the genre. So I'm seeing the ekphrastic as a response to the film noir style and certain films, but not a specific film.
Now, are you thinking also in terms of the books, because you mentioned The Big Heat, which is based on a book?
Right, right. I do. I love riffing on Raymond Chandler's language, and I actually use a lot of that in some of my poems, but I'm mainly responding to film.
Yes, I wonder, a question for all three of you. Could you just talk about the structure of your poems a little bit? How do you, at what point do you kind of make that decision as to, line length, stanza? Is it something that you evolve into as you begin writing, or do you set out from the start? This is kind of the structure I'm going to shoot for.
I started most of my poems by saying in the beginning. Then whatever I thought of, I committed to, and thought, well, what kind of weird world would it be if everyone looked like Larry Bird? And for the most part, my poem, this book is broken up into mostly prose poems, but then about maybe a third of it into lineated short line poems. I think I read one that was in lines. And it was basically by the breadth of what weird thing I thought of. So it was not a conscious decision, but more of a sort of in the process of writing it, what seemed intuitive. So the spacious poems ended up being ones which were more driven by image, and then the prose poems became more driven by rhetoric and kind of repetition of syntax and repetition of language.
I think it's intuitive. I find that as I'm writing, the poem finds the form. And that doesn't always happen, but I swore I'd never write a prose poem, and then I have an entire section, and I wrote them as such, and I couldn't conceive of any other form that they could be in. Sometimes I'm really taken lately with the 1.5 spacing, which is problematic for some people, but I really like the pause of the white space. And I feel that I need that because they're getting more and more dense imagistically. But yeah, I think it's an intuitive, though that, in every case, sometimes I'll go back and look at a block of text and be like, oh, I want this in couplets. And so that's not as organic. So it works both ways, but I would say, like Mathias, that they arrive more organically than they do not.
The same. No, I mean, it's pretty similar. I think for any poem I'm writing, it's whatever I wrote last, I try to do something a little different. I tend to prefer slightly longer lines, but I'll get sick of those and I'll move to really short lines. So like, the last poem I read has very short lines, and the one before it has very long lines. And it really is like you feel it out. The first couple lines, you have to have a few lines that you like, and then once you like it, you feel like it's worth committing to, and then you commit to the form.
I just wanted to know what strategies do each of you use to spark your creativity?
I want to hear about your creativity.
Strategies do I use? I don't know if I have strategies. I mean, I guess the strategy would just be reading. I like that Frost statement that, how many things have to happen to you before something occurs to you? You just have to live your life, and you have to have some painful things happen to you, but the same time, you have to have really joyful things happen to you. And I think after a while, you know, if you want to write a poem, it's sort of like whatever stays. Like you might have a lot of ideas for a poem, but the ones that are really worth pursuing stick around over a number of years. Like the first poem I read, I've been wanting to write that poem for about 5-6 years, you know. And I have a lot of other poem ideas that I don't even think about anymore. So I almost feel like the strategy is to just think of ideas and then let life happen, and whatever is left at the end, that's what you take up as your material.
Yeah, I think it's an influx of everything. For me, it's film, music, writing. The poet Christy O'Dalius had this wonderful analogy she gave to my class that she takes all of this information into the sausage grinder of her brain and makes a new meat of it. And I love that, even though I'm vegetarian, that I like that sense of that you reconstruct all of the information. But in terms of strategies, my main strategy, and it's something I try to teach my students, is letting go of your internal editor. So I tend to try to write in that sort of liminal space right as I'm falling to sleep. So I literally take my computer to bed with me, and I'll read a few poems, and then I'll just start typing. And it's a really interesting process because I don't come back to it for weeks or months. I try to just write, and I have all of these documents called nighttime writing. And then when I come back to it, my brain has its own patterns and motifs and its obsessions, and I'm able to then take all of that fodder and create something with it.
To me, it's just kind of work. Not real work, like I don't get calluses. But yeah, except for one, where I hold my pen. But that, I don't feel like a very creative person in general, and I don't think about inspiration or anything that I ever write being important. But that, the only thing I know how to do is make words combine in ways that are surprising and strange. So every day I do that. And if I don't do it, I feel like a jerk. I do. So every day I make myself write for at least, you know, some amount of time. Sometimes you can sit down and, you know, it's poetry and it's not like hard. So sometimes it's hard, but sometimes it's very easy and lovely. But I don't know, to me it's just, you sit down and do it every day, and every day you have to shock yourself. Or myself. Every day you have to shock me.
Mr. Koo, do you really think poets are losers? I mean, you're already making more money than some family practitioners.
Yeah.
In my day as a student, everybody wanted to be a poet.
Yeah. Not in that sense, like the social sense. Just in the sense that I have a friend who was teaching a poetry class. She once wrote on the chalkboard because she felt like her students were not understanding that. She just wrote, "You will lose." And just in the sense that we all lose things in our lives, and in some ways just acknowledging that you are going to deal with loss is a really crucial step in your, not only your development as a poet, but just as a human being. You know, when you're young, you feel like, you know, if you grew up with a certain kind of childhood, you feel like you're never going to lose anything. So I feel, I mean, I really do think that, like, what happens if you're happy? Like, is it possible to write poetry? I mean, I think it probably is, but most of the great poetry that I know and that I read over again deals very deeply with loss of some kind. So that's what I mean by that. Not in a kind of like high school sense. That in fact, I think we're very cool.
Very cool. Yes.
So Jason, I hope I'm not the cause of the one of the painful things happened to you.
Oh, no, no.
Or vice versa. Therefore.
As you're teaching a class on Chaucer, how do kids react to that Middle English into the content?
Not well. I mean, it's going pretty well. You have to really coax them through it. So you have to read a lot of it out loud, just so they understand it's poetry and they don't just try to translate it. But actually, once you explain, like, I go over that apology at some length because I try to explain, like, look, you think this is very intimidating, highbrow literature, it's like this ancient text. But actually, if you really look at what he's saying, it's just as bawdy as some of the stuff you're seeing on television these days. You know, and once they understand that, then they get a little bit more into it. But I don't think they're ever going to reread it. Maybe one or two of them.
How do you think it would relate to McDonald's, a quarter pound?
How does it relate to McDonald's? I don't know, the quality of the meat. The Middle Ages, it hasn't improved.
So have you all done collaborative? I know Simone, clearly you have, and Mathias, you have as well. Jason, have you done any collaborative?
Never publishable.
So I'm wondering, I guess, on that subject matter, for those of you who have, what's it like to sort of surrender authorship to that intersubjective space? And also, it seems to me this is really a trend in poetry. There are a lot of people engaging, including myself, in collaborative activity. Is that something that feels like sort of part of the zeitgeist, or is that like some sort of retraction from capitalism, or what? I mean, what is this sort of communal poetry endeavor? And so, from the very specific, what's it like for you personally to surrender authorship to something sort of more like taking the temperature of poetry in general? Why are people doing this now?
I'll tell you why people are doing this right now.
Because it's fun.
I mean, partially. I don't know. For me, I do collaborative writing with, I've published a number of chapbooks with a woman named Julia Cohen, who started off as my writing partner and became my life partner. I've written with other friends. My friend Zach Schomburg and I have a manuscript that we wrote. I've done collaborative work with filmmakers, visual artists. I'm doing a collaborative art piece for a gallery which involves 2 free jazz musicians, 2 writers, a filmmaker, and some person I'm not really sure what their role is. They're like part of it. And to me, it's for me again. I don't believe very deeply about individual expression. I think that art is a communal function. Art is about creating culture and relating to people. I don't really care about what I have to say. So the more that I create things that interact, the more it feels like making art to me. Also, it's fun. And part of the technology boom in printing, in access to avenues for publishing means that more work now is being published than ever in the history of humanity. So not only things that are supposed to glorify the individual can be published, but things that are genuinely games and fun things can be published. So to me, that's some of the things I think are important about it. And my girlfriend and I would get a bottle of whiskey and we'd write poems.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's the next wave in publishing, and part of that is that there's the freedom to do it now. I think it's becoming validated because people are getting published, and I think there's a desire for so many of us to collaborate. But for me, it arose out of the mere fact that I think of all of my poems as collaborative acts. For me, you know, it was coming to a college class when I was 19 and realizing there was no such thing as individual authorship. And that was a wonderful, freeing thing. But for me, all poems are call and responses. So even my books that are individual poems, I feel like I'm always paying homage or responding to some other poet or some other artist. And like Mathias, I've done, you know, collaborations with various artists. Philip is not my partner, so it makes it, well, no, I think it's interesting because it makes it, Well, it in some ways may be a different experience, maybe not. But we also, you know, a lot of poets in Chicago will get together and we'll do exquisite corpse exercises and then read on the radio. So it's something that we do as enjoyment, but I like it because it creates a third voice. And I really think of the manuscript as, we even have a pseudonym for it because it's neither of our voices. And I have my students do it because I think there's this idea that somehow the poem is less and that there's not a logical arc, and it's actually amazing how logical and that there is an arc to almost all of the poems that we created. Some are worse than others. And the last thing I'll say is the great thing about it too is you can be brutal to your own poems because you don't, the ego's out of the way because you don't look at it as your own, you look at it as a third entity.
Thank you very much.
Thank you all very much.
Thank you.